we wanted to know about it because we only discovered it in 1997, and it was discovered because a Navajo Indian was running marathons, and he got a very fast pneumonia. In other words, within a day of when he caught it, he was seriously incapacitated with pneumonia. By the third day, he was on a respirator, and by the fourth day, he was dead. So it's a very rapid onset pneumonia. And they had no idea at the time where he got it. And so epidemiology began trying to find out, trace the source of the disease. And they began looking for etiology. Etiology is the causative agent. And so they asked everybody around him, and they started looking for people that had a similar rapid onset pneumonia. Remember, lots of times people have these unusual illnesses, and they die, and nobody says anything. They just go, well, we did all we could do. And nobody does any research to find out. So they discovered that, 31 people had died of a similar syndrome in the last year in the southwestern United States. So, of course, the panic began, and they started wondering what was going on. And so they start interviewing everybody, and one of the CDC researchers went to the wise men, or the elders of the tribe, the Navajo, and asked them, had they ever heard of this disease before, and did they have a history of it? And the Navajo don't write down their history. They're told in little stories from one generation to the other. So the elders told him about this disease. And they said this disease had been seen by the Navajo for 5,000 years. And they said it's caused by bad wives. It's always the woman. Have you ever noticed? It's always the woman, the little ho-ho. Yeah. All right. This is a bad wife. And here's the story that they tell. The Great Spirit punishes bad wives by sending the deer mouse to take their firstborn. That was the story. Now, it goes back to this. The deer mouse, when it urinates and defecates, the virus comes out in that. And if you look at the normal way that the Navajo live, they live in huts with a dirt floor. And so in the wintertime, it gets quite cold in the desert. And so they eat inside. And when they're eating inside, crumbs and stuff fall from the table onto the dirt floor. If the wife doesn't keep them all swept up and out, mice come in to eat the leftovers and things that fall to the floor. And when they do, at night usually, or when people aren't there, animals pee and poo everywhere. And so when she comes in and sweeps up the area where the mouse has urinated, it puts into the air dust and virus particles, and susceptible individuals will breathe that in. And who's most susceptible? The very old and the very young. So that's how. But we didn't learn that. We just had a hint. It wasn't really the bad wife. It's the fact that the mouse is urinating in the dust, and by sweeping it or stirring it up, you can put it into the air and the susceptible get it. Now, how does it cause disease? Believe it or not, the virus doesn't do things to people. When you breathe it in, it goes into the capillary cells lining the capillaries. The cells lining the capillaries are infected with the virus. And the virus replicates happily in them without a problem. The problem is that in your bloodstream are killer T cells. And they see a virus-infected host cell, human cell, and they actually grab it and shoot a poison in it called perforin that explodes the capillary cell, capillary lining cell. That causes tissue fluid and lymph fluid to leak into the alveoli, filling the lungs with fluid. So your own immune system is what kills you, not the virus. The virus just infects a capillary cell and reproduces there without killing it. But our body detects it's infected and destroys the cell, which is the barrier between the bloodstream and the lymph and the air sac, and it fills with fluid. So it can kill you in 4 days. It's an atypical pneumonia. And why do we talk about it? Because if you go to the hospital, if you sweep your garage or a cabin, or maybe you have a little greenhouse or a shed, and you're cleaning it out and you breathe dust that a deer mouse carrying the virus, which they all do, has urinated or defecated on, it will infect the lining of the alveoli. And if it does, by nightfall, you will have trouble breathing. And they will rush you to the hospital. But in the hospital, other than putting you on a respirator, they'll start treating you as if it's viral pneumonia or if it's a bacterial pneumonia with antibiotics. They will not give you steroids to cut off your immune system. And that's the problem. They will treat it like another pneumonia that they don't know the cause of yet, but they assume it's either bacterial or viral, and that does nothing for you. You have to give them steroids to cut off their immune system to keep this from continuing. But by the time they figure out it's Southwestern Pulmonary Syndrome, you're dead. It only takes 4 days. So if you just need to be aware that if someone gets a rapid onset pneumonia, and if they've been associated with cleaning up a garage or something where dust by mouse could be breathed in, tell the people in the emergency room that it could be hantavirus, Southwestern hantavirus syndrome, because they're going to diddle around, and until they get an exact cause, they're going to treat it as if it's normal viral or bacterial pneumonia. And by the time they figure out it isn't, the person's going to be dead. So anyway, that's how it happens. Now, you're going to be asked on one of the questions, where is Southwestern Pulmonary Syndrome common? And it's the southwestern United States, southern Canada, and northern Mexico. Now, down in Argentina, there is one carried by a bush rat, a larger, not a mouse, but a rat that gets in cornfields and wheat fields. And this hantavirus is passed person to person. The one we have, you can only get from breathing the dust that a mouse has urinated on. So if she gets it and she sneezes in her face, she's not going to get it. If she nurses her, she's not going to get it. But the one in Argentina is person to person. So the doctors and nurses that treat the people that have it also get it and die. So we definitely don't want the one in Argentina to spread. And the first time it showed up, it killed 5 farm workers and 7 nurses and 3 doctors. Oh, and 2 doctors' wives. So, and then it disappeared. So we don't know the exact kind of rat that carries it. We know that all these hantaviruses are carried by rodents. So that's why we have this pathological fear of rats and mice, because they do carry so many diseases. Remember, the Black Death was carried, the bubonic plague was carried by fleas on rats and mice. Easily cured with antibiotics, but still it killed what? Something like 30 million people in the Middle Ages. So anyway, this particular hantavirus pulmonary syndrome has changed history. Remember, if the wrong people die, history's changed. And so when it came to the inheritance of the throne of England, Prince Henry Tudor, a Catholic, was supposed to inherit the throne. But he died of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, and Henry VIII became king. And Henry VIII wasn't given his divorces by the Catholic Church, so he established the Protestant Church in England, and England went from being a Catholic country to a Protestant country, and so much of history was changed by that. So just by getting this one disease, an important person could change history. Okay, so anyone have questions about hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, called Southwestern?
Did you do CNS and gram stain for the skin?
No. because it's a virus cause, and there's nothing in the sputum. Okay, so the next.
What is the difference between zoonosis and emerging viruses?
Oh, emerging viruses can be any kind of virus that is new to us. In other words, an emerging virus is a virus that's been there for thousands of years, but we didn't live there yet, or we haven't changed conditions, so it spread. We didn't notice it was around because not enough people got it. Like HIV is an emerging virus. Jumped into man several times and puttered around, but not many people got it until we had blood transfusions and lots of sex and that sort of thing. It was a zoonosis because it was originally a disease of chimpanzees, and people cleaning chimpanzees that they kill for food got it into their bloodstream. So a zoonosis is when it jumps from a host it evolved in over hundreds of thousands of years that have reached a balance into a new species where it's deadly and wipes them out. And an emerging virus is a virus that we have never seen before because not enough people got it. So this one is Southwestern hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is an emerging virus. It's been here 5,000 years. Why did we just see it? Because we didn't live in the desert in huge numbers. So when people got it and they died, we didn't think anything about it. When we watered the desert and brought, several million people to San Bernardino, and we started watering lawns and producing more seeds, we get more people in contact with more mice, and the mice population goes crazy, because there's lots more food because we're bringing in water to where it was once a desert. So then we have more people come in contact with more mice, and we get the disease. Suddenly we see the disease. So that's a societal and environmental change that causes a virus that's been there forever from suddenly being seen. All right, the next one is the other hemorrhagic viruses. And the first hemorrhagic virus we noted was called Lassa fever. And by the way, viruses are named either by what they do or where they're first seen. So this one was first seen in Lassa, Nigeria. And it was in a Methodist hospital, United Methodist Church. Many churches and philanthropic organizations back in the 60s and 70s thought that, it's terrible that in poor countries in the world there is no medical care. And so they set up hospitals and clinics all over Asia and Africa and South America in very poor areas where people didn't have access to health care. The problem is they didn't give them adequate supplies. They didn't have electricity to run an autoclave and sterilization. They didn't have rubber gloves for the nurses. And so they actually lots of times did more harm than good, because when you introduce giving people injections, their prenatal vitamins by injection, by needles that you reuse all day long, you can spread a disease. Or you transfuse blood that you don't even know what that blood has got in it. And so in this case, all the nurses in the hospital died. And they died because a lady came in with Lassa fever that was pregnant. And Lassa fever, you get a very high fever, your airways constrict a lot, and basically what they do is they just nurse you through the high fever and hope that you live, and it doesn't constrict your airways enough that you suffocate. And so the nurses were treating her, but they didn't have enough rubber gloves. So all they did was wash their hands between patients, and one of them had been tending her roses and had rose thorns cuts in her hand, and she was cleaning up the sputum from the sneezing and so forth from this virus, and she got infected, and all the people that tended the nurse got infected because they didn't use the incomplete universal precautions. They didn't have enough rubber gloves. So it started by being brought in by a lady that had it from the outside, who they reused needles on. Then, when she was sick, the people that got the needles that used on her got sick, and when they were treating the patients in the hospital, the nurses didn't have enough equipment to sterilize their needles and to wear rubber gloves, and so they got it, and so everybody in the hospital, except for a few, died. And so what we discovered was, how did people get it? And it's a very interesting one. It's carried by a bush rat, a big old rat. And this rat lives in the fields in Africa where they're growing the corn and the wheat and whatever. And at the end of harvest, after they picked all the corn, they have a harvest celebration and they burn the fields. And when they burn the fields, they just start a line of fire on the field, and the wind carries it across the field, and the kids, for fun, go and get sticks and wait at the other side for the rats to run out, and they beat them and kill them. Well, when animals die, guess what they do? They poo and they pee. And this virus is carried in the rat pee, in the rat poo. So the kids running around barefoot that are beating these rats, and the rats are dying and releasing their bladder and their fecal matter. The kids get it on their feet. Kids go home. Mama says, "Oh my God, you smell like hell." Mama gives them a big bath. The kids don't get sick. Mama dies. We don't know why it doesn't kill the children, but it does kill the adults. So this one's carried by a bush rat, again in the urine and defecation, and it's usually adults that die from it. We don't know why. So that was the next one. The next one we're going to talk about is Ebola. And Ebola has a bunch of strains, and they're named by when they first appeared. And by the way, Ebola is the worst hemorrhagic filoviruses, and it looks like that under an electron microscope. So anytime you're looking at any culture and you see that, run! This stuff will kill you so fast. It's extremely contagious, it's carried by contact, and it wipes out entire towns and villages and hospitals. Again, all by contact, because they weren't using, you know how I had to tell people, put on your smock, why aren't you wearing gloves, why aren't you wearing gloves, and all these things? One time is all it takes. So, how did so many people die of this? Because when people die in very poor countries, what happens? Let's say a little kid in your family dies in the hospital or at the clinic. What does the family do? They go, they pick up the body, the women in the family wash the body and dress it in the best clothes for the funeral, and you have the funeral. Guess who gets sick and dies? Everybody that handled the body and washed it gets sick and dies. And then the people who take care of them die. And then the nurses that weren't using gloves die. So this is, again, we had to actually change a cultural procedure of when people die, we don't release if they die of an Ebola, we don't release the body. They bury them in a mass grave and burn them, because handling and washing and dressing the body is what transmits the disease to the rest of the village. So anyway, it was first seen, this virus is a hemorrhagic fever. After about a week and a half, you will bleed out from every hole. You'll bleed through your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your hoo-hoo, your hee-hee, everything. You lose clotting factor. And the best book on it, oh my gosh, read this book. It is amazing. I stayed up all night, 2 nights reading it. It was unbelievable about the first reports of Ebola and where it came from and how it killed people. First person descriptions of people who watched other people, and it was amazing. After you read this, you won't sleep for 3 weeks. Nightmares. You'll wake up screaming. I passed it on my mother. She passed it on my father. We were all up in the middle of the night screaming for 2 days after that. Oh my God, I dreamed we bled out. Alright, so it was amazing. But anyway, it was first seen in Marburg, Germany in the 50s among zookeepers. The monkeys they imported to the zoo got sick, and the keepers of the monkeys got sick and died. So both monkeys and people got Marburg in Germany. And it was 80% fatal to those, in other words, of the people that got it, 80% died. That's really high. All right, but it disappeared. And we didn't see it again until the 60s in South Sudan. And in South Sudan, at a cotton factory, a number of women died. And we couldn't figure out how in the world they would get a filovirus. And they actually, this is what, they were in this thatch-roofed little factory on posts with a concrete floor. And they worked in here spinning cotton. And they got, many of them got it, 60% of them died. We couldn't figure out how. No monkeys were involved. Nobody knew what was going on. Later on, we'll figure out why. Huh? No. The actual host of this is fruit bats. And fruit bats were nesting up here. And when they cooed, it came down and people were breathing it in. You couldn't see it because, you know, it's called guano, bird poo. And it, you know, like dust, you know. And they were breathing it in, and that's how they got it. And that's how the monkeys got it in Africa, because whenever the figs and fruit ripens, all the animals come to eat it. And the fruit bats come, and they poo on the figs and the fruit, and other animals eat that, and that's how the monkeys and tigers and even people got it. So its actual carrier is the fruit bat, and it does nothing to the fruit bat. By the way, what's a bat? A rodent, a flying rodent. It's a mouse with wings. All right, so the next time we saw it was in northern Belgian Congo, Zaire, now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. If you look at a map of Africa, there is this very bizarre shaped, huge country right in the middle. Shaped like that, we'll learn that that is not the way it should be shaped, but because after World War II, the League of Nations, which was before the United Nations, divided up the world that wasn't civilized and gave it to the European powers to Christianize and civilize, which I think is hilarious. They divided up China, you know, the British area of China, the Portuguese area of China, the French area of China. They divided up India and Pakistan, you know, gave it to the English. And in Africa, the Portuguese got Mozambique and Angola, and the British got South Africa, and Namibia was given to Germany, and this was given to the Belgian Congo, and this is French West Africa, and this is Ethiopia was an independent country. It's been that way for a long time, but the English got this area, they got this area, they got this area. The Italians, they did such a great job. They got Somalia. The Portuguese got this, this, and this, and the French got that. Anyway, they drew borders based on what Europeans draw borders. How do we draw borders in Europe? Rivers, mountains, and oceans. Does everybody that speaks French live on the north side of the St. Lawrence River? No, they live on both sides. Guess what? And so these countries' borders are drawn completely by geography, not by who lives there. Which means that Africa will forever be in civil war. Because, if you look, right now in the Congo Republic, there are 5 civil wars going on. They will always be because the tribal areas overlap in countries, and no one group is all in one country. So no one has a majority. And if you have a parliamentary form of government where each group, nation group, puts up a list of candidates, and you know, do all Armenians have the same point of view? No, so you're going to have at least 2 parties for every group. You're going to have 26 parties. And if they vote, you can have a government who wins most of the seats in determines the prime minister and all the government, and only get 20% of the vote. So that means 80% of the people voted against him. Yet they set up, this is what happens in Italy. Do you know how many governments Italy's had since World War II? 175. Because they have 26 political parties, and every time one pulls out, the government falls, they have to have elections again. So anyway, Zaire, in northern Zaire, if you look at what, and remember this country has changed names a whole bunch of times. It's, by the way, the richest country in the world. It has more copper, gold, diamonds, minerals than any other country in the world. It's the one that has, I don't remember what that one little mineral that's needed for cell phones, but it has that and everything else. But it is also one of the poorest because everybody's sucking the resources out of it. But anyway, right here along the Ebola River in northern Zaire, if you see the movie and the band played on, which is a history of AIDS in America, you will see in the very first scene, the man who was responsible for most of the AIDS work in America, Don Francis, is being sent by the CDC to this little hospital in northern Zaire along the Ebola River, and he arrives and there are only 2 people left alive. All the patients are dead, all the nurses are dead, all the doctors are dead, and all the hospital workers are dead, and the only people that are left alive is one cook who was about to die and a 9-year-old boy. And they walk in and they find everybody dead, so they take some tissue samples and start burning the bodies, and then they find out about this woman. And so they go and talk to her and they watch her bleed out from Ebola. And so this particular strain is 96% fatal to monkeys and people. And so that's the one we freak out about whenever we see this filovirus. We wonder, is it Zaire strain? Because these are bad enough, but this, if you get it, you're dead. And remember, contact transmission. All of these are contact. You come in contact with bodily fluids from a person that's infected, and it gets in a hole or any cut or abrasion, you're dead. So that happened, and then the next time is 1989. And in 1989, in Reston, Virginia, in a bunch of monkeys that were imported for research at the National Cancer Institute and the National Institute of Health, monkeys imported from the Philippines started dying all over. Remember, when you import animals for research, they have to be quarantined for 3 months to see if they have a disease. And so they were in this quarantine facility, and monkeys started dying 10, 20, 30 a day. And they died, and they weren't in contact with each other. This one died of the same disease, this one, but they never came in contact. So they couldn't figure out until they did some research, it was airborne. An airborne Ebola. And they freaked out, because what do you do if you have an airborne Ebola type virus? And so they called the CDC, and the CDC said, we can't do anything. We don't handle animals, only when the first person is infected. So people have to die before we get in there. We can give you advice, but we are not legally responsible. And this was before, September 11th, we discovered there is nobody responsible for a zoonotic disease in the United States at that time. So they called USAMRIID. USAMRIID is U.S. Army Rapid Defense Force for Biological Weaponry. And because they were the only people, and after all, you want somebody that you can order into a dangerous place. And these guys had nothing to protect them. They used paper coveralls and a respirator. And they were sent in to euthanize all the monkeys. Have you ever seen a wild monkey? They have these claws on all 4 on 2 arms and 2 legs, and they have a tail that will wrap around your neck, and they have fangs. And they were all in cages, and they were supposed to open the cage, capture them, and put them down. All while having latex gloves, paper coveralls, and a respirator.
Wouldn't it be more sense to kill them in the cage first?
Yeah, or gas the whole place. But they wanted to capture some of them alive. Anyway, they sent the guys in. Nobody died because this one is 0 fatal to humans, but almost 100% to monkeys. So, can you imagine if these 2 cross or hybridize? You get this one that's 96% fatal to humans, and this one that is airborne. You got a disaster. So this is why they set up, now the USDA has, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture now has a rapid response force that is in actual spacesuits that are protected for these kinds of outbreaks and so
So that
forth.
actually happened.
Yeah, and it's in the book, The Hot Zone. Real interesting. Well, anyway, this disease Ebola, what about cures? The only people that have a treatment for it are the Russians. And the Americans use what we call passive immunotherapy.
Wait, so the Russians aren't done with this?
They are.
Okay.
What we do is we take the 1 or 2% of people that have ever had it, and we buy their blood plasma. And then we give it to anyone that's exposed, because supposedly they made antibodies to it and it's in their plasma. So this is called passive immunotherapy, because you didn't make the antibodies, you stole them from somebody else that made them. It's like antivenom. How we treat people that get snake bit, we go and we get the venom from a snake. We inactivate it by heating it. We inject it into a rabbit. The rabbit makes antibodies. Then we kill the rabbit, drain the rabbit, and remove the antibodies and store it in a refrigerator in case you get bitten by a snake. That's passive immunotherapy. Passive means you didn't make the antibodies, another animal did. And so that's what we use people that have recovered, but there's not enough. So the Russians took the filovirus, grew it up, inactivated it, and injected into horses, and then recovered their antibodies and use that to treat people with. Because rabbits died. Only the horses were able to make antibodies to it.
It's just such an expensive animal.
Yeah, I know. Well, it doesn't, they don't kill them.
Oh, they don't?
No, they just inject them and they just keep draining blood out of them
Wow.
and removing the antibodies.
Is there ways to do it without using animals?
No, so far, nothing.
No?
Nothing. So anyway, if you're asked what's the most dangerous virus in the world today to us, it's Ebola. It's the one that we have very little treatment, but it's kind of easy to prevent because it's all contact, the ones that kill humans. So the last time they had an outbreak in Zaire, they did something that's not very comfortable but worked. They put a quarantine around the villages that had it in the hospital, and they just said, nobody in and nobody out until everybody dies inside that's going to die. And nobody will be picking up any bodies, and everybody that goes in will be using full universal precautions, and they stop the outbreak. Of course, not too good if you're inside. So, all right, that's the hemorrhagic viruses. Next and last in this chapter is hepatitis. Remember, hepatitis, the only thing in common of all the hepatitises is they are infections of the liver. And they cause abnormal liver enzymes. All right, so they are totally different diseases. The only thing they have in common is they're infections of the liver. Some are viruses, some are RNA, some are DNA, and one's a viroid. All right, so let's talk about the most contagious, the most easily transmitted disease in the world. The one that the universal precautions were designed to prevent the transmission of, hepatitis A, called oral hepatitis or foodborne hepatitis. Almost all hepatitis is transmitted generally the same way, and this one is poo or pee from somebody who has it into the water or food. However, if you have an active infection, if you're in the first few days of getting it, it is in your sweat, your saliva, your vaginal secretions, your semen, not many people have both, okay, in your poo, in your pee, in your blood. If you can think of a liquid in a human being, that is full of hepatitis A if you're in the early stages of infection. I have known people that have hugged someone who went jogging and gotten it because they were sweating. So it is extremely easy to get. The treatment is the same. Go to bed. Let your body recover. And we will come by once a week and run your blood enzymes and see if your liver enzymes are returning to normal. The symptoms are you feel icky, you have a low-grade fever, your skin turns extremely yellow, your whites of your eyes turn yellow, it's called jaundice, and your urine turns black. It looks like you're urinating out dark iced tea or coffee, black coffee, and that's dead liver cells that are coloring your urine. I got this because you know how people are in high school? Cruel and nasty, and they love to tease others. So when my sister and I moved to South America with our family, we went to the American high school in this little Brazilian town, and everybody loves to haze the new people. So they either spoke French or Portuguese around us the whole time. The first 3 months we were there, everybody treated us like we were some sort of plague. You know, they were the new people. And in this school, everybody had to take English, Portuguese, and French. Those are the 3 languages that everybody had to have. And since we only spoke English, they basically shunned us. So when we got thirsty, my sister and I went to out in all the rooms, because it's a very tropical country, open out. So you have, you know, the school is in this big shape like this, and then there's a porch, and each room opens out to the porch. And then there's a long hill and another place for the high school rooms. So outside on this porch was an old-fashioned water fountain. In the old days, this is before they had treated water and sewage and all that, the way in which they got water to drink in the dry times of the year was they collected it in a cistern on the roof from rain. And so it ran down and fed from a cistern on the roof, which rats and stuff fell into, and dead birds that carried this. So my sister and I were thirsty, and instead of drinking down here at the filtered one that everybody knew about, we just went to one that was hanging on the wall there, and the water came out. It was kind of brown. We let it run a little bit. It was warm, but at least it was water, and it got clear, so we drank it. And that should have been cut off years before, but it wasn't. It's just everybody knew that it was bad water, and nobody drank it, but nobody told us. We both came down with hepatitis A, and urine turns black, skin turns yellow, and we were in bed for 3 weeks. And the only thing they can do when you're exposed is give you gamma globulin. Anyone ever heard of gamma globulin? Gamma globulin is made from hundreds of donors, blood donors. What they do is they take the serum from blood donors and they concentrate it so it's really thick, like Karo syrup. And they hope that somebody has had that disease and has antibodies in their blood serum. So whenever you have been exposed to something that they have no treatment for, they give you a big old, painful by the way, dose of gamma globulin in the hopes that somebody it was manufactured from had antibodies to that illness in a quantity that might help you. You know, almost always it doesn't work. It's a last-ditch Hail Mary. Maybe they won't get it. kind of attempt. So remember, this is again passive immunotherapy. This one's made from donated blood of hundreds of people, concentrated, hoping to get some antibodies. So that's hepatitis A. Remember, it's the most it's called fecal-oral route of transmission. Means urine and feces or other things have gotten into the water or food, even though any bodily fluid can transmit it. Any questions about hepatitis A? What will I ask you? It is an RNA virus. It is the most contagious. It's the one that we designed the universal precautions to prevent. That's where they came from, because that's the most easily transmitted. And the first symptoms are jaundice, and there is no treatment. Yeah.
So,
Oh, there is a vaccine for it, and now most people get the vaccine, especially if you're a healthcare worker.
So it says immediately after, that means you won't get it again?
That's right.
Okay.
So if you get it, you're immune, but you can never donate blood because you might have particle of it in your blood. So if you've ever had any of the hepatitis, even if you got over them, you cannot donate blood ever, because there could be particles that could infect another person,
Isn't
even
there
though you don't have it.
Isn't there a certain age though? Because I got it when I was 8, and I've been able to donate blood. They just asked me, how old were you?
Really?
Yeah, and I told them 8, and they're like, okay, well, if you were 10, then you won't be able to
Wow.
donate blood.
Never heard that. They always
Never?
deny me.
Yeah? They always take
We got
blood.
ugly problems. Uglies transmitted. All right, the next one is hepatitis B, and this one's kind of twisted. It used to be a sexually transmitted disease in the United States. It is no longer. Did we talk about that before?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and why is it no longer a sexually transmitted disease? Because the primary way in which it moves from person to person is no longer sex. Now it's by needle sticks or sharing needles or contaminated blood. So, hepatitis B, again, same general symptoms at the beginning. It's transmitted by blood-to-blood contact or by sexual transmission. And there's good news and bad news. Good news is there's a vaccine. It's not perfect, but there's a vaccine for both A and B, and you better get it. And all healthcare workers are required to get it, and most of the time they give it to you free where you work at. So if you haven't had it. Children now get it as a childhood vaccine. Why don't we want people to get the disease? The answer is because 40% of the people that get completely over it and are immune. That's okay. That's good. It doesn't usually kill. But here's the bad part. 10% of the people that get it get over it, but they are carriers for the rest of their life, and they have enough, even though they're well, they have enough in their semen or vaginal secretions to infect another person for the rest of their life. So they are what we call chronic carriers. Well, before there was AIDS, there was chat rooms for hepatitis B carriers on AOL, because the only person you could marry was either someone who had it and got completely over it, or some other carrier, because having sex with them would transmit it. Even though neither one of you had an active infection, you were a carrier. So that's bad. 10% of them are intermittent carriers. Intermittent carriers are not always shedding it. They only shed it when they're stressed. But when they're stressed out, they can infect another person even though they're well. And then the rest die. So that's not so good. So because of this, we developed a vaccine. All right, so that's hepatitis B. The next one is hepatitis C, and probably this is the most dangerous as a healthcare worker, because it's transmitted by microscopic drops of blood. So This is the one where they tell you, never use a towel that someone has used, never use a toothbrush, never use someone else's razor. Don't pick up floss that somebody else has used and use it. None of those things, because microscopic drops of blood. It can be transmitted sexually, because sometimes people during sex get a little rough or they're not quite ready and there's minute tissue tear involved, and microscopic drops of blood. It's not primarily transmitted by sex. It's primarily transmitted by needle sticks, sharing razors. By the way, anything that is a non-living transmitter of disease is called a fomite. My favorite final exam question is, what are fomites? And I have A biblical tribe in ancient Israel. No, those are the Hittites. All right? Fomites are non-living transmitters of infection, like doorknobs or tissues or toothbrushes or razors or stuff like that, where you can get infectious material on acid. What's interesting about this? One, about 20% of the people that get it get a very chronic disease that results in hardening of the liver and cirrhosis and cancer of the liver, and they have to have a transplant. About half the people get it, and they don't feel bad and they don't get sick, and they just give it to other people. And then the rest of them have to be treated, and the treatment is alpha interferon. And interferon is, let's just put it this way, people that get this and have to be treated with alpha interferon say they would rather die than get the shot. Because every day it makes you feel like the first day of the flu. Your body aches and you have a low-grade fever from interferon. That's the reaction. Interferon is a very small protein made by mammals that prevents nearby cells from being infected by the same virus. So if one of your cells get infected by a virus, it will produce interferon that protects nearby cells. And in the old days, it used to be very expensive to get interferon. It would take $100,000 to treat one person. Now we can do it recombinantly, but we've discovered every different tissue has a different interferon. So it's complex in the treatment, and the side effects are heavy.
How long?
The rest of your life.
What is it? What does the interferon do?
It protects nearby cells from being infected by the same virus.
Is it infected bone? So interferon
Basic-
is not.
It interrupts. Oh.
I don't know what that
No, I just wonder if it was one of those college alarms.
is. It sounds like.
Yeah, it does sound like college alarm. Yeah, one of the bomb threat things that we have. Anyway. But,
We have one shelter.
yeah, there's one also in the administration building. I wouldn't go in the dang thing, no, it's so nasty.
Doesn't it, the treatment they do for hepatitis C, don't they mess with your bones?
Oh, yeah, and it
Because I have a friend who had it.
causes, what do they call it, where you have weak bones? Osteoporosis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, one good thing about hepatitis C is there are 5 genotypes, and genotype 1 is 80% curable, but the cure is pretty miserable. That means you have to take ribavirin and interferon for 2 years and get your viral load to stay below 0. And remember, is 0 0? No. There is no machine that can measure actual 0. So, however good your machine is, whatever it says is 0, remember, is not. Real 0 somewhere down here. That's just as low as the machine can measure. If you get your viral load to stay at 0 with treatment for 6 months, then they will add a protease inhibitor that was discovered by doing AIDS research and works on this. And once they give you that for a year, they take you off of it, and for some reason, it completely clears. So you will, it hasn't been 5 years, which makes me suspicious, because, you know, cancer isn't cured until you're clear for 5 years. But 80% of all people that have genotype 1 and go through this complete treatment have been declared clear, and it's been 3 years. So this may be a very good, but I have a friend that got this from a skiing accident in Russia. He was taken to the hospital and had a transfusion, and they reused needles on him that other people had been, and he got hepatitis C in the hospital from the transfusion. And he's been on this ribavirin interferon for 5 years. He cannot reach 0, and he recently just quit taking it because it made him feel so miserable. I mean, you know, remember, this is a liver, so you can't eat fatty foods. You have to eat almost all your food has to be vegetable. There are so many dietary restrictions, it's unbelievable. So anyway, this is the one you're probably going to be most afraid of, because you can get stuck with a needle from someone that was used HIV and not get HIV, but you can't get stuck with a needle that's been used on someone that has hepatitis C and not get hepatitis C. It is much more transmissible. Okay, so hepatitis D, remember, is the only viroid. Hepatitis E is found in Asia. It's only deadly to pregnant women. We don't know why only pregnant women get it. If you get it, you get over it, but you can catch it again. There's no immunity to it. But it's not constant like C is, or carrier status here. It's like A. But A, once you get over it, you don't ever get it again. E, you get it, you get over it, but you can catch it again. And it's waterborne. And then the last one, G, is very similar to E, except that you get it, and you have it the rest of your life, but it doesn't seem to cause any liver damage. But so few people have it that we really don't know what the long-term end is. All these are carried by contaminated water. So E and G and A, or fecal oral. This one's blood and sex. This one is microscopic blood. This one you need is contact, but you have to have B to get it, so it effectively has a vaccine. And there is no F. And the reason is they isolated hepatitis D and called it F. And then they discovered it was a viroid, and they already had isolated it, so they had to erase F, but then they had discovered G, and so there is no F. All right, so that is down to our last two topics, and our last two topics are influenza and interferon. And influenza comes in 3 varieties, A, B, and C. Don't worry about C, only pig farmers get it. And it doesn't mutate much, and if you get it, you get over it. So this is not important. It exists, and pig farmers have to suffer through it, because humans and pigs can get it, but you get it, you get over it, you can't get it again, it doesn't mutate. So it's not a significant illness. Influenza A is the one that is really, really scary. And the reason it's called Asian flu is because it can infect horses, birds, pigs, and people. And the only place in the world where pigs, people, and birds live together is in Asia, where they have these huge commune farms where they raise both pigs and ducks, and people take care of them. And so that's in Vietnam and China. And why are we care? Because the only animal that can get all of these is the pig. The pig can get bird influenza, it can get pig influenza, and it can get people influenza, all at the same time, and mix the genes. So that humans taking care of pigs get an influenza that has got human genes and pig genes and bird genes, and we don't have any immunity to other species. Now, pigs cannot get horses influenza, so it's not that big a deal. But pigs can get bird, human, and pig, and they can mix up the genes so that the people that are taking care of the pigs can get an influenza that's contagious person to person that has a pig gene or has a bird gene. And since we have no immunity to those, it spreads around the world. So that's why we're really afraid of influenza A. We don't worry too much about influenza B. Yes, it mutates, but only humans can get it, and so we can get it and give it to other humans, and it can mutate and we can get it again, but it's not something alien to us. Hepatitis A can be alien, a different species. Okay, so what do we do about the flu, and why do we worry so much about it? And the reason is the Spanish flu of 1918. A strain of flu that we had never seen before killed between 60 and 120 million people in 1 year. We know it kills 60 million because we counted them in Europe and the United States. But nobody counted how many people died in South America, Africa, and Asia. So if 60 million people died in the United States, Canada, and Europe, God only knows. Oh, you need to get in? Yeah. God only knows how many people died worldwide. That's all right. So, and what is unusual about this disease that we have never seen before is that people turn blue just before they die. And the reason is this virus has little spikes, and that's what allows it to attach to host cells. But every time it goes through just a few people, the spikes mutate. And if the spikes mutate, the vaccine is no good. And some of these spikes have receptors for red blood cells, and they cause red blood cells to explode. They're hemolytic to red blood cells. And that's the kind of influenza we're most afraid of, because this Spanish flu, what it did was it lysed red blood cells. And when blood isn't carrying oxygen, what color are they? Is it blue? So that's why they turn blue just before they die. And on January the 1st, 1918, the Philadelphia Inquirer headlines was, "Is this the end of time?" Because there were more people dying in Philadelphia than there were left to bury them. They had Body Day, where if people died in your house, you were supposed to lay them out on the street and let them freeze overnight, the bodies freeze, and the city would pick them up the next day. So in Philadelphia, which was the most infected city in the United States, more people died than were left to dig the holes to bury them. Everyone thought it was the end of time. And if you look at the population of the United States at that time, having 20 million people die in 1 year means that it was at least 2 out of every family. So it was a huge number of people, and it scared us, and to this day, the government reacts whenever they find a strain of influenza that has this hemolytic quality, H1N1 and all of those. At one time, we thought it was a gene from a parrot that caused this. Now, they're not so sure. And you'll never guess. They want to reconstitute the Spanish flu. But they want to put it together again to see what it looks like, because we didn't know virus existed in those days. So what they did was they went and dug up bodies in the permafrost in Norway and Sweden that had been buried in the 1918 epidemic. And